Okay, this is Economics Review, page 2. All right, 1820 to 1840, we have our first industrial era, not to be confused with the one after the Civil War, okay? Now, at this time, one of our political leaders, you remember Henry Clay, ran a lot for president, never won, but he introduced an economic plan for the country that was known as Clay's American System. And it's kind of like Hamilton. He wanted to strengthen the federal government and the nation as a whole through an economic program. Not all parts of it were accomplished, though. Basically, he argued each region does something different for the country. The North does the industry. South does cotton. The West, and at this time the West is the Northwest Territory, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, does the food. Okay. What he wanted to do was put together a high tariff to cause manufacturing to develop, and then use the money from the tariff to connect everyone with transportation. So a high tariff, and then use that money to connect everyone with transportation. We are going to have a tariff, but states' rights people did not like the idea of the federal government paying for transportation that perhaps only went through a couple states and did not benefit everyone. So very little of the railroads, the roads, the canals built at this time were built by the federal government. Most of it was built by the states. And therefore, which two regions are connected with transportation?
The Northwest and the North.
The Northwest and the Northeast, and the South is really left out, okay, which will begin a sectional divide. All right, so let's look at the tariff controversy that starts during this era, and it really goes all the way back to the era of good feelings and the tariff of 1816, okay, and then we'll see it really explode in the 1830s. How does a tariff contribute to sectionalism at this time?
Tariffs stayed in the North.
Yeah, very good. Tariffs, for the most part, were something the North wanted because it helped their manufacturing. And the South really didn't benefit usually from them. Okay, for example, the tariff of abominations, it made them have to pay a higher price for like the cheap cloth that they clothed their slaves in. So, what was the nullification crisis that occurred in 1832? What did that have to do with? Tara?
South Carolina didn't want to pay for the tariff.
Very good. South Carolina said it was not going to have the tariff of abominations, as they called it, in their state. They declared it null and void. And that goes back to the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions when that idea of nullification is first implanted by Jefferson and Madison. And we never really address whether a state has that right. Now, Jackson says you can't do that. Congress passes the force bill. He's prepared to use military action if necessary. But how is it all resolved at this time, Neil? Very good. The Compromise Tariff of 1833, which slowly lowered the tariff over time. And so, again, what we did is we kind of put a Band-Aid on the issue, and we're not really addressing the real problem. Do states have this right of nullification? So that's all because of economic policy. All that sectionalism is because of economic policy. All right. The first industrial age, then. Let's talk about some key developments we have in transportation. Anybody want to give me one thing?
Steamboat.
Very good. Steamboats and Fulton. Steamboats are going to be incredibly important to the development of the Northwest Territory and the city of Cincinnati. Okay. Very good. Roads. The Cumberland Road, National Road. Okay. And turnpikes, where you have to pay a toll, and that kind of pays for the maintenance of the road. What else? Railroads. But again, is this the era of the railroad? No. We start building them, we start using them, but this is more the era of the steamboat and the canal. Okay, the main one being the first one, the Erie Canal. Okay. All right, key developments in industry and inventions. Very good. And the cotton gin is actually 1793, but we always lump it in with this first industrial revolution. But just note that it's 1793. Also, Eli Whitney invented interchangeable parts. What else? Huh?
Steam engine.
The steam engine. McCormick Reaper. It's going to change farming. Very good. The Factory System by Samuel Slater. And we'll talk about Lowell Mills when we do the diversity review. Also, The Sewing Machine by Elias Howe. And The Telegraph by Morse. Okay, during this era, we will also see the death of the National Bank. Okay? Why did Jackson kill the National Bank? Gage?
Because it was ran by non-elected leaders and it had too much power.
Very good. Yes, he said it's run by unelected leaders and it favors the wealthy, it hurts the common people. How did he get rid of the bank and why was it unconstitutional? Kenzie? Yeah, he just took all of the federal government's money out of the National Bank and put it into pet banks. And it had been established that Congress had the power to create a national bank, so most people argued it's unconstitutional for the president to then destroy it and take out the money without consulting Congress. Okay. And what did it lead to, the fact that he got rid of the National Bank? Panic of 1837, because these pet banks are going to go crazy just giving out loans. And also his specie circular policy, where you could only buy land with like gold, hard currency, will also contribute to that panic. So we do not have another national bank ever. What kind of replaces the National Bank and when do we create it? Federal Reserve, and that'll be in 1916, okay? Except for during the Civil War when we briefly have kind of a national bank set up. All right, and in the South, during the industrial era, what was going on? What's king in the South? Cotton. And it's making the South a lot of money, but they're putting all their eggs in one basket. Okay. Now let's talk about how the Civil War is going to affect the economy and eventually lead us into the Second Industrial Revolution. So, characteristic in terms of how each region was impacted by economic changes in this era. All right, how is the North going to come out of the Civil War, and how are they going to be impacted by the Civil War economically? What does it cause to happen in the North? The Second Industrial Revolution occurs in the North. What else occurs in the North because of the Civil War and then industrialization?
New markets.
Okay. Yes, they're going to be industrializing, so they're going to be making a lot of goods. And one thing that you need to know is that the Civil War created corporation and the very first millionaires who would have the capital to industrialize us. That's one of the connections between the Civil War and industrialization. Because there are people who produced things for the war effort that made a ton of money. And coming out of that war, then they have the money to build the railroads and build the factories and industrialize us. It also eventually then will lead to urbanization, more immigration, and the Morrill Tariff in the Civil War helps to create more industry, and that's MORRILL. R-R-I-L-L, the Morrill Tariff. All right, what happens to the South economically coming out of the Civil War? Gage?
Their infrastructure was ruined because of Sherman's slaves.
Okay, very good. Their whole infrastructure is ruined because of Sherman's march to the sea. What are they going to do economically after the Civil War? There's a term we need to know. Okay, they're going to continue mainly doing agriculture. And yes, slavery gets replaced with sharecropping. So, which almost ends up like still being slavery for the slaves, where you are farming a plot on a plantation, right? You have to pay rent to the plantation owner, and if you don't have a good crop one year, right, you also have to supply your own supplies. If you don't have a good crop one year, you may not have enough money to pay the rent and cover your supplies. So then you end up in debt to the plantation owner, and then you're just stuck on that plantation. It's like a cycle.
Isn't that what Mao did in the Chinese during like the Cold War era?
I don't know because I don't know enough about my Chinese history, to be honest. I told Mr. Riker that today. So, because I can't proctor the AP World Test because I teach AP American History. And this is one of their rules. Okay. The New South is a term that you need to know. What does the term New South reference? Why did Southern leaders start to use that term? What was their goal?
After Reconstruction, it was used.
And their goal was to create a more diverse Southern economy. So introduce some industry and diversify the agriculture. So what is the first industry you do see developed in the South after Reconstruction and the Civil War? Textile industry. But they will continue to lag behind the North economically. And again, it's not until the era we're in right now, the 1950s, when you suddenly see, and World War II, where you see all this industry and science and technology spring up in the South. Okay. All right, the West. The West is impacted by the Civil War because there's two important acts that are passed during the Civil War that are going to impact the West. Anybody give me one of them? The Homestead Act, which gave 160 acres of free land if you could farm it for 5 years and live on it 6 months out of the year. It was easier said than done. Most people were not able to do that successfully, and most people did not get their land through the Homestead Act. Most people who got land in the West were overcharged it by the railroad companies who were getting the large land grants on either side where they were building the railroads and then charging outrageously high prices for it. The other act built the Transcontinental Railroad. Anybody know what the name of it was? The Pacific Railway Act authorized the building of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1863 through the northern route. Besides farming, what else did people do if they moved west to make money? Josh?
The gold rush.
Mining, or option number 3, ranching. So it was either farming, mining, or ranching, all of which were very difficult to be successful at out there. Okay, so what role did the Civil War play in shaping each of these regions? Well, in the North, it led to industrialization because it created the capital. It had a tariff, right? The South, it destroyed the slave system, so they are forced to have to start to diversify a little. And the West, it increased settlement, and therefore we're going to see conflicts with the Native Americans as we finish settling the Western United States.